December 1944, Ardennes. Snow lay heavy on the forests, muffling sound and swallowing light. German tank crews waited inside their machines, engines idling low, breath fogging against steel. They trusted their Panthers and Tigers, weapons that had dominated battlefields for years. Against Shermans, they felt unshakable confidence. Against most Allied armor, they knew they had the time. But on those frozen roads, a new presence emerged. It did not follow the rules of duel and endurance. It appeared, struck, and disappeared before a German gunner could even adjust his sight. Rumors had mentioned a fast American tank destroyer, but many had dismissed them. Speed, they laughed, was not armor. Speed did not decide wars. That morning, the laughter ended. A Panther crouched in ambush, its 75mm gun aimed down a snow-packed road. The gunner peered through his sight and caught movement. Not a Sherman. Lower. Sleeker. Moving far too quickly for its size. Before the loader had rammed home the next round, the intruder fired first. Sparks erupted from steel and the shadow vanished back into the woods. The Germans sat stunned. What had just happened? From sighting to strike to disappearance, minutes at most. Their machines weighed 3 times as much, but their speed was barely a third. Against this phantom, armor and firepower counted for nothing. 3 minutes. That was the window German crews discovered. From the moment the American destroyer revealed itself to the moment it vanished, the gap was measured not in kilometers, but in minutes. If they did not react instantly, the chance was gone. For men who had long dictated the terms of battle, the reversal was stunning. Tigers and Panthers had faced threats before, but always in contests where armor and gun decided the outcome. This time the duel never came. The American machine refused to play. It struck from cover, from flank, from angles of surprise, and then it was gone, at speeds their tracks could never match. The M18 Hellcat had entered the field, America's fastest armored vehicle of the war. Capable of 55 miles per hour on roads, nearly twice the pace of a Panther, far beyond the lumbering Tigers. It was not built to endure fire. It was built to outmaneuver, to dictate terms, to vanish before German steel could reply. Reports from the Ardennes quickly spread. Officers sent urgent radio warnings. Fast American destroyers operating in the area. Crews stared through periscopes expecting another Sherman. But instead they glimpsed a blur of motion already gone by the time they swung their guns. At Bastogne, one platoon of Hellcats struck a column of Panthers. The first went up in flames before it had spotted the attacker. The rest tried to traverse turrets, but the Americans had already pulled back, speeding through forest trails, reappearing minutes later on the opposite flank. Another Panther was hit, then another. Survivors fired blindly into the trees. They never caught a target. Veterans who had fought in France, Russia, and North Africa now felt hunted. For years they had been predators, armored beasts no Sherman dared to face head-on. Now something new stalked them. Not thicker armor, not bigger guns, but speed that made armor meaningless. It unsettled more than tactics. It shook confidence. German crews who once laughed at American machines now cursed them. In after-action reports, officers wrote of American vehicles striking from concealment, withdrawing before engagement. One survivor summed it bitterly. They are ghosts. They appear, they kill, they vanish. For Hitler's last gamble in the West, the Ardennes offensive, time was supposed to favor the Germans. Blitzkrieg had always been about seizing initiative, dictating momentum. But in these forests, that rhythm was stolen. The Hellcats imposed their own timing. The Germans had 3 minutes to react. Too often they failed. The secret of the Hellcat was not its armor. It had almost none. Crews joked that if you sneezed too hard inside, the blast might pierce the side. German shells, even from lighter guns, could shred it with ease. But that weakness was intentional. The designers had sacrificed protection for speed. creating something no one expected: a tank destroyer that could outrun almost everything on the battlefield. Under its hood roared the Continental R975 radial engine, the same basic power plant that had carried aircraft like the Sherman tank's predecessors. Stripped of excess weight, bolted into a hull of thin steel and open turret, it turned the Hellcat into the fastest armored fighting vehicle of the entire war. 55 miles per hour on roads. Unheard of in 1944. Panthers struggled to reach 25. Tigers managed even less. Against them, the Hellcat was not a tank. It was a racing machine with a gun. Its main weapon was the 76mm M1 gun. On paper, not extraordinary. Against the thick frontal plates of a Tiger or Panther, it struggled. But against sides and rears, where armor thinned, it punched clean through. American doctrine did not ask the Hellcat to duel head-on. It asked it to strike from ambush, from the flanks, to fire once, twice, then vanish before the enemy could respond. It was speed as survival, velocity as shield. This philosophy ran deep in American thinking. Where German engineers pursued invincibility through armor thickness and gun length, American planners leaned on production, mobility, and coordination. Radios were standard in every Hellcat, allowing crews to call, coordinate, and relocate faster than their opponents could react. Speed was not only on tracks, but in communication. Orders traveled instantly across platoons. German tankers, often relying on flags or shouted commands, could not match that tempo. The open turret shocked many new crews. It offered almost no protection from shrapnel or weather. Rain soaked uniforms, snow froze hands, and shells could cut through from above. But it gave visibility. Commanders could see the battlefield, spot threats, and direct fire with speed that close turrets could not allow. One veteran later said, "We felt naked, but we also felt fast. You saw everything, and if you were quick, you lived." Tactics grew around this design. Hellcats rarely advanced alone. They worked in pairs, in platoons, weaving like hunters. One machine fired, drawing attention. The others shifted position, circling flanks, firing from new angles. Then all vanished into cover, moving faster than German crews could traverse their heavy turrets. To fight a Hellcat meant fighting an enemy that refused to stand still. German tankers found this maddening. They were trained to expect duels. They trusted their armor to absorb blows, their guns to deliver decisive strikes. But how could they duel an enemy that refused the fight? Crews reported wasting shells on empty woods, firing into positions already abandoned. By the time a Tiger lumbered forward, the Hellcats were miles away. The shock came not just from losses, but from rhythm. War had rules, patterns familiar even in chaos. Shermans advanced, Germans held ground. Duels played out. The Hellcat tore those rules apart. It fought like a phantom, writing a new equation: speed plus fire equals survival. Numbers tell the story. A Panther could rotate its turret at about 15 seconds for a full circle. In that time, a Hellcat moving at speed could disappear more than half a mile down a road. A Tiger took even longer, with its massive 88mm gun demanding precision and weight. Against lumbering steel, the Hellcat was gone before aim could be found. American crews knew their weakness. If caught, they died. Armor was paper, but they embraced the gamble. Survival came from moving first, firing first, leaving first. "You don't wait for them to find you," one gunner recalled. "You hit, then you're gone. If you stayed, you were dead." In Italy, Hellcats tested this doctrine against German armor dug into hills. They sped from cover, fired at range, and darted back before counterfire. In France, they prowled hedgerows, waiting for tanks to appear on roads. In the Ardennes, they slipped through snow and forest, cutting columns into burning fragments. Everywhere they went, they taught German crews that armor thickness meant nothing. if speed erased the duel. For the Allies, the Hellcat symbolized a different kind of war machine. Not indestructible, not massive, but efficient, quick, and coordinated. Its crews often felt exposed, but they knew they were part of something larger. Radios linked them to artillery, infantry, and air. Together, the system made speed lethal. German reports grew bitter. Captured documents describe American tank destroyers using movement as defense. One officer wrote with frustration, "We cannot hit what will not stay. They fight only in shadows." Yet behind those shadows lay design, doctrine, and an understanding that speed could be deadlier than steel. The Hellcats' presence transformed battlefields. German tankers who once advanced with confidence now hesitated. Every road, every forest track could conceal hunters that would strike and vanish. A Panther commander later admitted, "We no longer trusted the silence. At any moment fire could come, and then it was gone." In war, uncertainty kills as surely as bullets. The Hellcat thrived on it. Hellcats did not fight like other machines. They fought like hunters. The doctrine was clear: strike, move, strike again. Every ambush began with silence. Engines idled low, crews crouched in their open turrets, binoculars sweeping roads and tree lines. They knew their armor would not save them. They relied on speed, cover, and surprise. In the Ardennes, winter cloaked the forests. German columns snaked through valleys, their tanks leading convoys of trucks and half-tracks. Hellcat platoons waited in the tree line, commanders whispering final orders. The first Panther appeared, black exhaust curling in the cold air. A gunner whispered, "Target." A thunderous shot cracked the silence. Flames leapt from the Panther's flank. Before German crews could respond, the Hellcat reversed, gears grinding, disappearing into woods at 40 miles per hour. By the time German turrets turned, there was nothing to see. Minutes later, the platoon reappeared from another angle. The Germans, still scanning the original tree line, now faced fire from their rear. Panic spread. Convoys halted. Trucks burned, men scattered. In less than 20 minutes, a handful of Hellcats had shattered a column designed to spearhead an offensive. Survivors recalled firing its shadows, always a step behind. The tactic was not invention on the spot. It had been drilled into crews during training. Never stand still. Never trade shot for shot. Choose the ground. Take the flank. And move before they can answer. The open turret gave commanders visibility. Radios gave speed to decisions. Crews spoke in clipped sentences. "Two left, shift, fire, move." Within seconds, the platoon could scatter, regroup, and attack again from new cover. In Italy, the doctrine proved just as deadly. German armor clung to ridges, watching narrow roads below. Hellcats waited hidden in olive groves and stone walls. A column advanced, engines echoing through valleys. Hellcats darted out, fired, and vanished into villages before German guns could depress. They used the landscape as much as their engines. Hills for concealment, curves for ambush, ruins for cover. One officer later admitted, "They were never where you expected them. They were always already gone." Survivors on both sides recorded the chaos. German diaries spoke of invisible enemies who struck and withdrew. American crews wrote of the pressure, the need to move instantly, the fear of staying seconds too long. One commander described the feeling, "It was like being a fox among hounds. If you stayed still, you were torn apart. So you ran. And you bit when you could." Numbers reveal the method. A Hellcat could accelerate from cover, fire, and be gone in less than 90 seconds. German tanks, heavier and slower, needed minutes to reposition. By the time a Tiger aimed, its quarry was half a mile away, already behind another ridge. The imbalance was not in firepower, but in time. 3 minutes was the German window. The Hellcat needed less than 1. These tactics demanded nerve. Crews knew a single mistake meant death. An exposed Hellcat could not trade blows. Many were lost when engines failed, when ground slowed their retreat, when a German gunner guessed correctly. But the gamble favored speed. For every Hellcat destroyed, several German machines burned. The Ardennes offensive provided endless opportunities. German spearheads stretched long and thin, supply lines vulnerable, roads clogged with vehicles. Hellcats hunted convoys as much as tanks. They struck fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, anything that slowed momentum. A Panther without fuel was just as useless as one destroyed. German commanders cursed the hit-and-run attacks that left their offensives bleeding. For the Americans, it was proof that doctrine worked. Tank destroyer units had been controversial. Thin armor, open turrets, unfamiliar tactics. Critics doubted their survivability, but in December 1944 they vindicated the theory. Hellcats were not replacements for tanks. They were wolves among columns, shredding momentum, turning mass into confusion. German veterans admitted the fear. One officer recalled, "We could not prepare. We could not predict. They did not fight fair. They fought like shadows." For soldiers trained in the proud duel of armor, the humiliation was deep. To be destroyed, not in contest but in ambush, felt dishonorable, even unnatural. Yet it was devastatingly effective. The rhythm of war shifted. Where once German tanks dictated battles with armor and gun, now they reacted, turning late, firing blind. The Hellcat, with its doctrine of speed and strike, had turned hunters into prey. For years, German tank crews had lived with a certain rhythm of battle. They trusted their steel, believed in their armor, and measured time in minutes they thought belonged to them. When a Sherman appeared, they had seconds to adjust, to aim, to fire, confident that their gun would finish the contest. That sense of dominance shaped their confidence. They fought knowing they were predators. The Hellcat changed that. The first encounters felt unreal. Tanks that were supposed to crawl at the pace of men now moved faster than trucks. Machines that should have fought head-on struck instead from the side and vanished. Crews who had relied on the thickness of their frontal plates suddenly found themselves burning from flanking shots they never saw coming. The armor they had trusted became a trap, heavy and slow, locking them in place while the enemy slipped away. Reports spread quickly. In company briefings, officers warned of fast American tank destroyers. Some men scoffed. Propaganda, surely. Others asked uneasy questions. If such vehicles existed, how could they be stopped? When the reality reached the front lines, disbelief turned to fear. Crews wrote in diaries about shadows that moved faster than their turrets, about ambushes that ended before a shot could be returned. Psychological shock spread deeper than losses. For veterans who had survived years of brutal combat, the battlefield was suddenly unfamiliar. They had learned to read sounds, to sense danger, to anticipate where Shermans or anti-tank guns might wait. Against the Hellcat, none of those instincts worked. The vehicle was too fast, its rhythm too different. What had been predictable became chaos. One Panther commander described the feeling after surviving an ambush. It was as if time had betrayed us. We saw them. We turned. But the time was gone. They were already elsewhere. Another wrote bitterly, "Our tanks are fortresses, but what use are fortresses when the enemy never attacks the walls?" The erosion of confidence mattered as much as destroyed tanks. Crews who once advanced boldly now hesitated at crossroads, scanning tree lines, wasting minutes on caution. Commanders slowed columns, fearful of invisible hunters. Speed, once the essence of German armored doctrine, was stolen from them. The Hellcat not only destroyed vehicles, It destroyed momentum. Inside tanks, conversations changed. Gunners who had boasted of killing Shermans now muttered about enemies they could not catch. Loaders who once joked about Allied shells bouncing off their armor whispered about fire striking from the dark. The sense of superiority that had carried them through campaigns in France and Russia cracked. German officers noticed. Reports to higher command spoke of loss of confidence among armored units, not because of numbers, but because of uncertainty. Crews no longer trusted their armor, no longer trusted time. They feared what they could not see, what they could not catch. Even veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened by battles against swarms of T-34s, admitted the difference. The Soviets had overwhelmed with numbers, with mass. That was frightening but comprehensible. You saw the enemy, you fought, you endured. Against the Hellcat there was no endurance. There was only sudden impact and absence. One officer summarized, "The Russians drowned us in steel. The Americans haunt us with speed." The psychological strain deepened as rumors spread. Stories exaggerated speed, inventing numbers faster than reality. Some claimed Hellcats could outrun aircraft. Others swore they could cross fields before a turret moved a degree. Fear magnified facts, turning the tank destroyer into a legend. For the Americans, this was victory before shots were fired. Crews knew their machine was vulnerable, knew they could not survive a direct hit, but they also knew their enemy feared them. That fear gave them space to move, to strike with even greater confidence. One Hellcat commander later recalled, "We felt light, fragile, but when we saw them hesitate, we knew we owned the fight." The Germans tried to adapt. Orders instructed crews to move in tighter formations, to cover flanks, to slow advances and scout more carefully. But every adaptation cost time, and time was what the Hellcats stole best. Columns crawled where they had once surged. Initiative drained away. By the summer of 1944 and into the Ardennes, the change was visible. Panthers and Tigers still inspired dread, still destroyed countless Allied tanks, but their aura of invincibility was gone. Every crew knew that somewhere, fast hunters waited, able to undo them in minutes. That knowledge sat heavy in every march, every halt, every silence broken by the growl of engines in the distance. The Hellcat's gun destroyed tanks. Its speed destroyed confidence. For an armored force built on pride, that loss was a wound that no repair shop could fix. German armor was never about speed. It was about dominance through mass and thickness. The Tiger weighed nearly 60 tons, its armor more than 100 millimeters thick in places. Its 88mm gun feared on every front. The Panther, lighter but still massive, carried sloped plates and a high-velocity 75mm that could rip through most opponents before they closed. Even the humble Sturmgeschütz, the assault gun dug into ambush positions, was a nightmare for advancing infantry and Shermans alike. German doctrine revolved around these machines, fortresses of steel that dictated combat by sheer presence. The Hellcat was the opposite. 20 tons lighter, with armor no thicker than a few centimeters in most places. Its open turret left crews exposed to shrapnel and weather alike. Against the frontal plate of a Tiger, its 76mm gun struggled, even at close range. On paper, it looked like a mismatch. But battles are not fought on paper. Where the Tiger demanded ground, the Hellcat refused it. Where the Panther sought duels, the Hellcat denied them. Against a Tiger, the Hellcat had no chance head-on. But it never tried. It circled, used roads, hills, and forests to strike flanks and rears where armor thinned to 40 or 50 millimeters. At those points, the 76mm gun punched through, igniting fuel and ammunition. Against a Panther, the story was similar. Its sloped frontal armor shrugged off most hits, but its sides were vulnerable, and its turret turned too slowly to catch a Hellcat weaving at full speed. Crews learned the difference the hard way. In France, a Panther column halted at a crossroads when the lead tank burst into flames. The Hellcats had fired from a ridge and already moved. The Panthers swung turrets forward, waiting for the next attack. Instead, fire came from the side, the Americans already relocated. 2 more tanks fell before the Germans realized they were chasing shadows. Their advantage in armor meant nothing when the enemy never gave them the front to aim at. The Sturmgeschütz faced a different problem. Low, heavily armored at the front, and deadly in ambush, it relied on staying hidden until prey appeared. But when the prey was faster than its gun traverse, the advantage vanished. Hellcats refused to walk into the arc. They circled, forcing the Stugs to rotate clumsily, exposing weaker plates. A German officer noted with frustration, "We built our machines to meet them face to face. They refused to meet." Numbers show the gulf. A Tiger averaged 23 miles per hour on roads, often less in field conditions. A Panther managed 25 at best. A Stug, even less. The Hellcat reached 55, more than double, sometimes triple, the pace. In a duel, the Germans towered. In a chase, they were outclassed before the contest began. Armor thickness, once Germany's shield, became a weakness. The greater the plate, the greater the weight. The heavier the machine, the slower the response. German engineers had built masterpieces of strength, but masterpieces that could not change direction fast enough to stop a strike-and-run enemy. American doctrine leaned into this. Hellcats did not travel alone. They worked in packs, using radios to coordinate. One drew attention, another circled. A third cut supply vehicles. German tanks, scattered along columns, struggled to respond. Their coordination relied on line of sight, on signals. Radios existed, but not for every vehicle. By the time orders reached all, the Hellcats had shifted again. Survivors recalled the sense of futility. A Tiger commander wrote, "We fired and the shells landed where they had been, never where they were." A Panther crewman admitted, "Our armor was thick, our gun was strong, but neither meant anything when they never stood still." On the production lines, the difference was equally stark. Tigers and Panthers were complex, slow to build, demanding rare materials and endless hours of labor. Hellcats rolled out of General Motors plants by the hundreds. Simple, fast, and standardized. The Germans built quality. The Americans built quantity. And sometimes, quantity moved faster than quality could respond. In duels of reputation, German tanks still commanded all. But reputation does not stop shells, and aura does not win battles. Against the Hellcat, what mattered was not who could absorb more punishment, but who controlled the tempo. And in that contest, the Germans always lagged behind. War is not only fought on battlefields. It is fought in factories, in assembly lines, in the endless repetition of bolts, plates, and engines. For the Hellcat, that battlefield was Detroit. General Motors, already a titan of peacetime industry, shifted its plants into a machine of war. Between 1943 and 1944, it produced 2,507 M18 Hellcats. Each rolled off the line faster than German factories could finish even a handful of Panthers or Tigers. The contrast was staggering. A Tiger demanded nearly 300,000 man-hours to build. A Panther? About half that. Each required rare alloys, precision machining, careful labor. In war-torn Germany, factories struggled under bombing, resources dwindled, and production slowed. The Hellcat was designed for the opposite. It used standardized parts, accessible materials, and streamlined methods. A single Hellcat consumed a fraction of the hours needed for a German heavy tank. Inside the plants, workers moved with speed equal to the machines they built. Welders joined plates of thinner steel, less demanding than the massive slabs needed for German armor. Assemblers fitted engines already proven in other vehicles. Open turrets simplified construction. Radios, optics, and guns were standardized, pulled from the same supply streams feeding Shermans and other American armor. It was efficiency turned into steel. The philosophy was clear: build enough to overwhelm. The United States did not aim to match German engineering in one-to-one contests. It aimed to create systems that worked in mass. The Hellcat, Lightweight and simple, fit perfectly. When one was lost, another replaced it quickly. Crews rotated into new vehicles within days. For the Germans, losing a Tiger meant weeks or months before another could arrive, if it arrived at all. The industrial rhythm echoed the doctrine of the Hellcat itself. Just as the vehicle won battles by speed and movement, the factory system won wars by tempo. Convoys carried finished machines to ports. Ships ferried them across the Atlantic, and within weeks they were in Europe, painted, fueled, and fighting. German commanders, watching their columns burn, did not only face American gunners, they faced Detroit. Accounts from factory workers reveal their pride. One welder remembered, "We knew what we were building. Every day we counted another Hellcat ready to ship. We felt we were striking blows as surely as the soldiers." A woman on the assembly line wrote to her brother in France, "Perhaps the tank you see tomorrow will be the one I touched today." The simplicity of design also saved lives. Mechanics in the field repaired Hellcats quickly. Engines could be swapped in hours. Tracks were easy to replace. Thin armor bent, but was easier to cut and patch. German crews often waited days for spare parts, sometimes cannibalizing wrecks to keep one tank moving. American crews had supply trucks, depots, and spare engines stacked like inventory. By 1944, production was so steady that Hellcat battalions deployed fully equipped, something German units rarely achieved. Even elite divisions in the Wehrmacht often received fewer Panthers than authorized, many arriving broken or unfinished. American units received full strength, with extras waiting in depots. The imbalance grew with every month. Numbers told the story. Germany built 1,347 Tigers across the entire war, about 6,000 Panthers. The United States produced 2,507 Hellcats in less than 2 years, alongside tens of thousands of Shermans. For every German heavy tank rolling to the front, multiple American machines already waited across the Atlantic. German prisoners often expressed disbelief at the scale. Interrogation reports record complaints. "We destroy one, and 2 more come. It is hopeless." A Panther crewman captured in France said, "Your factories fight as much as your soldiers." He was right. In the end, the Hellcat was not just a weapon of speed, it was a weapon of mass. It embodied the American approach: less armor, less complexity, but built in numbers, supplied with fuel, kept moving by industry that never slept. Each time a Hellcat raced into an ambush, it carried with it the power of a continent's factories. That was something no German crew, no matter how skilled, could ever overcome. The Hellcat was only as dangerous as the men inside it. Thin armor and an open turret meant death if a crew hesitated. But in the hands of trained soldiers, the machine became something far greater than its specifications. It was not built for duels, and the crews knew it. Their survival depended on precision, timing, and trust in one another. Training drilled the doctrine into them. Crews practiced moving at full speed, halting, firing, and then retreating before a return shot. Gunners were taught to aim not at thick frontal plates, but at flanks, rears, and weak spots. Commanders learned to read ground like a map of opportunity: ridgelines, woods, curves in roads. Drivers trained to handle the vehicle like a racer, shifting gears fast, taking corners that left heavier tanks crawling. Every man had seconds to do his part. One slip, and the entire machine was lost. Radio discipline tied them together. Every Hellcat carried sets that let platoons speak instantly. Short commands replaced lengthy orders. Left, fire, move. Within seconds, multiple vehicles could coordinate, striking from different angles, then scattering like wolves, vanishing into the trees. German crews, who often relied on slower communication, could not match this tempo. The open turret, a curse in bad weather and enemy fire, became a gift in combat. Commanders stood exposed, but they saw everything. They could shout corrections, spot enemy armor before it appeared in sights, and direct fire with speed closed turrets never allowed. "We felt naked," one commander admitted, "but we also felt alive. You could see the whole battlefield, and that made you faster than them." Veterans remembered the thrill and the terror. A gunner recalled his first ambush. The Panther came into view. I aimed at the flank, fired, and we were already moving. I never saw if the shot hit until smoke rose behind us. My hands were shaking, but the training took over. Another described the silence after a successful strike. "We didn't cheer, we didn't talk, we just moved to the next position. You never stopped." Hellcats often fought in groups of 3 or 4. One drew attention, another flanked, a third cut off retreat. The key was motion. They were never still long enough for German guns to lock on. A German officer later admitted, "They were not tanks, they were hunters. You could not pin them down." The crews knew their vulnerability. A single hit from almost any German gun could destroy them. They compensated with aggression. "You stayed alive by moving faster than fear," one driver said. "If you hesitated, you died." The thin armor forced them to embrace the risk. Instead of weighing them down, it sharpened their edge. Life inside was harsh. Rain poured into open turrets, soaking uniforms and ammunition. Snow froze hands. Wind whipped through at high speed. In summer, heat roasted crews in steel boxes that stank of fuel and sweat. Yet many loved their machines. They praised its speed, its agility, the sense of control. Compared to Sherman's, the Hellcat felt light, responsive, almost alive. "It was the only tank that made you smile when you drove it," one veteran said. The bond between crew and machine was intimate. Drivers learned every sound of the engine, every vibration of the tracks. Gunners trusted their weapons to fire true even at speed. Commanders relied on instinct, knowing when to strike and when to vanish. Crews often named their vehicles, painting nicknames and symbols on turrets. For many, the Hellcat was not just steel, it was survival, a partner in the gamble of war. Some became legends within their units. Platoons that mastered ambush tactics recorded dozens of kills. In one action near Aricourt, Hellcats struck a German column repeatedly over 2 days, claiming dozens of vehicles while losing only a few of their own. Survivors credited discipline and nerves. "We never stopped moving," one said. "We were always somewhere they didn't expect." Even failures taught lessons. When a Hellcat was caught in the open, when a driver misjudged ground, when a gunner fired too slow, the result was instant destruction. Crews saw friends burned alive, vehicles torn apart in seconds. Yet they returned to their machines, knowing their only chance was to fight the way doctrine demanded. German prisoners often expressed grudging respect. Some admitted the Hellcat was the most frustrating enemy they faced. Others cursed its speed, calling it unfair. One Panther crewman told interrogators, "We had armor, we had guns, but they had time, and time was stronger." The Hellcat was never meant to be a hero's machine. It was meant to be part of a system, fast, mobile, coordinated. But in the hands of crews who trusted its design and each other, it became something unforgettable, a weapon that lived on nerve and speed, turning ordinary soldiers into predators who rewrote the rules of armored war. War is measured not only in design and doctrine, but in what machines actually did when steel met steel. The Hellcat proved itself not on paper, but on the roads of France, the ridges of Italy, and the snow-choked forests of the Ardennes. There, speed and firepower turned into burning columns of German armor. In Italy, the Hellcat made its combat debut in 1944. The mountainous terrain, winding roads, and villages seemed hostile to any tank destroyer. Yet the Hellcat thrived. German forces relied on ambushes, using Stugs and Panthers to block passes. American crews learned to dart from olive groves, fire into flanks, and vanish into cover before German guns could adjust. In one action near the Arno River, a platoon of Hellcats caught a column of German vehicles strung out along a road. The lead half-track erupted in fire. The rear was struck next, trapping the convoy. Within minutes, trucks, fuel carriers, and an armored car were destroyed. Survivors reported confusion and panic, convinced they faced more vehicles than actually present. Speed had multiplied force. By the autumn battles in France, the Hellcat was fully integrated into armored operations. During the Lorraine campaign in September 1944, American tank destroyer battalions, equipped with Hellcats, faced German counterattacks by Panthers and supporting infantry. At Ericourt, Hellcats maneuvered in coordination with Shermans and artillery, exploiting fog and broken terrain. German armor advanced confidently, believing in their superiority, but the Hellcats struck from concealment, slipping between villages and ridge lines. Panthers, slowed by poor visibility, turned blindly as fire hit their flanks. In a series of engagements, American tank destroyer units claimed dozens of German tanks for the loss of only a few of their own. After the battle, German reports described enemy forces moving with unusual speed, striking from unexpected positions. For the crews inside, it was proof that their fragile machines could kill giants. The Ardennes brought the greatest test. Hitler's last gamble, the winter offensive of December 1944, pushed deep into American lines. Snow, forests, and fog seemed to favor the Germans. Columns of Panthers and Tigers rolled forward, their crews confident that surprise and firepower would carry the day. Against them, Hellcats were thrown in desperate defense. At Bastogne, Hellcats formed part of the thin American screen. A German column moved down a frozen road, Panthers at the head. From the tree line came sudden fire. The lead tank burned, the rest halted, turrets swinging in vain. The Hellcats vanished back into the forest, reappearing minutes later on the flank. 2 more Panthers were lost before the Germans fired a single, accurate shot. Survivors recalled the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by vehicles half their weight. In another clash near Nouville, Hellcats worked with paratroopers to hold ground against repeated attacks. Each time German armor advanced, Hellcats darted from concealment, firing at exposed sides. When counterfire threatened, they sped away, leaving infantry to finish the fight. A paratrooper later said, "We trusted those little cats. They never stayed still, but they always came back." Even when outnumbered, Hellcats changed outcomes. Near Bastogne, one platoon delayed an entire German column for hours, striking from multiple angles, forcing halts, and buying time for reinforcements. Their thin armor doomed them if caught, but their speed made capture rare. The cost was high. Some crews never returned, yet the delay disrupted the timetable of the offensive. By early 1945, the Hellcat had earned its reputation. In engagements across France and into Germany, they destroyed hundreds of German vehicles. The official records speak clearly. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M18s claimed more than 500 German tanks destroyed in Europe. Losses of their own, though real, were far lighter than expected given their thin armor. The doctrine had worked. German prisoners often admitted their frustration. "We could not fight them," one Panther commander confessed. "They never gave us the jewel." Another, captured after the Ardennes, shook his head. "It was not tanks. It was speed. We were always too late." The results were not only in numbers, but in time. Each ambush delayed advances, slowed momentum, forced German units to regroup. Hellcats turned hours into days, and in war, days meant victory. For the Americans, the proof was undeniable. The M18 had not been built to stand in line like Shermans or crush resistance like Pershings. It had been built to strike fast, and in that role, it excelled. Across Italy, France, and Belgium, its record was etched into burning wrecks left on roadsides and in fields. By the time Allied armies pushed into Germany itself, the Hellcat had become a symbol of American flexibility, fragile in appearance, deadly in motion. Crews who had doubted their open-turret machines now spoke with pride. "We killed faster tanks because we moved faster," one veteran recalled. It was that simple. For German armor, it was a bitter truth. Strength meant little when the enemy refused to fight by old rules. In every shattered convoy and ambushed column, the lesson repeated. Time belonged to the Hellcat. Every weapon leaves lessons, not only for the side that wields it, but for the enemy that faces it. The Hellcat forced the Germans to adapt in ways they had not anticipated. Heavy armor had once dictated the flow of combat. Now, speed stole that control. German officers began rewriting their reports. Panther and Tiger units were instructed to travel with infantry screens stretched further out, to spot ambushes before they struck. Columns were ordered to tighten intervals, to prevent Hellcats from slipping between vehicles. Commanders demanded that reconnaissance patrols move ahead with greater frequency, scanning woods and villages where the hunters might wait. Yet these measures cost time, and time was exactly what the Hellcat took away. Some tried to lure them into traps. A Panther platoon might halt deliberately, presenting its side, hoping to draw fire. The instant a Hellcat revealed itself, concealed Stugs or infantry anti-tank teams would strike. On paper, the idea seemed clever. In practice, it rarely worked. The Hellcats were too fast, their commanders too cautious to take the bait. They fired once, saw no immediate destruction, and vanished before the counterblow fell. The Wehrmacht also experimented with closer integration of flak units. Fast-firing 20mm and 37mm guns, meant for aircraft, were turned against ground targets. If Hellcats appeared, the flak batteries might at least disrupt their dash with bursts of fire. In some cases, it worked. Open turrets were vulnerable to shrapnel, and crews feared even small-caliber hits. But flak could not cover every road, every forest, every valley. The hunters always found openings. The larger lesson for Germany was bitter. Armor supremacy no longer guaranteed initiative. Even their most powerful tanks, built at immense cost, could be slowed, outmaneuvered, and destroyed by lighter machines wielding speed and coordination. The aura of invincibility around the Tiger and Panther eroded. Soldiers whispered that no matter how thick their steel, there was always something faster waiting in the trees. For the Americans, the lessons were just as sharp. The Hellcat confirmed that doctrine mattered as much as design. Thin armor could succeed if tactics embraced its reality. Crews learned discipline, knowing that hesitation was fatal. They learned coordination, trusting radios and one another to act in concert. Above all, they learned that war rewarded those who controlled time. The Army took note. After-action reports praised the M18's speed and effectiveness in ambush. Officers emphasized the need for aggressive maneuver, for integration with infantry and artillery, for flexible command that allowed tank destroyers to move without waiting for lengthy orders. Units that mastered this tempo saw success. Those that clung to cautious, tank-like behavior suffered losses. The machine was only as effective as the doctrine behind it. Hellcat battalions also taught the value of morale. Crews feared their vulnerability, yet victories built confidence. Survivors recalled how the first successful ambush transformed their view of the vehicle. One gunner said, "When we saw a Panther burn, we stopped thinking about our thin armor. We started believing in speed." Belief in turn created daring, and daring created results. Strategically, the Hellcat fit perfectly into the American way of war. The United States did not need a tank destroyer that could duel at Kursk. It needed a weapon to complement Sherman's, to counter German counterattacks, to exploit mobility. The M18 did that. By tying doctrine, design, and production together, The Americans built a machine that served its purpose with ruthless clarity. Even after the war, officers reflected on the paradox. The most fragile tank destroyer had often been the most effective, not because it was stronger, but because it forced everyone, crews, commanders, even enemies, to think differently. War, they realized, was not only about power, it was about tempo, psychology, and trust in doctrine. German officers who survived admitted the respect. One wrote in post-war interviews, "The Americans understood something we did not. They used time as a weapon." That was perhaps the Hellcats' greatest victory. It proved that minutes could be deadlier than millimeters, and speed could break steel. The M18 Hellcat was never built to be indestructible. It was built to be fast. Its steel plates, barely thick enough to stop machine gun fire, were a reminder that protection was not part of its design. Its open turret exposed crews to shrapnel, weather, even snipers. On the blueprint table, it looked fragile compared to the monsters it faced. Tigers with armor thicker than a man's arm, Panthers with guns that could punch through almost anything, and Stugs that crouched like bunkers on tracks. Yet in combat, the Hellcat proved that war was not only a contest of armor and firepower, it was a contest of time. German crews had always trusted their machines to buy them seconds, even minutes, to react. A Panther could absorb hits long enough for its gunner to aim carefully and destroy its opponent. A Tiger, slower but stronger, was like a moving fortress. But against the Hellcat, those seconds disappeared. By the time a turret began to swing, the target was already gone. In 3 minutes or less, the American destroyer had appeared, fired, and vanished into cover. What mattered was not how thick the steel was, but how quickly the shot was delivered and how quickly the hunter disappeared. This redefined the battlefield. For years, armored combat had been imagined as duels, gun against gun, plate against shell. The Hellcat tore up that script. It refused to duel. It hunted. Its 76mm gun was not designed to bore through a tiger's nose. It was designed to exploit flanks, rears, and mistakes. Its speed allowed crews to create those mistakes. A Panther crossing an intersection became a target. A Tiger stuck in a column was vulnerable. The Hellcat made timing its weapon, and timing was often fatal. Crews embraced this philosophy. They knew a single hit would destroy them. That knowledge sharpened their instincts. They moved like predators, never staying longer than a few shots, never trusting stillness. Radios turned platoons into packs. One vehicle drew attention, another flanked. A third hit supply trucks. Then they scattered before the enemy could answer. Coordination replaced armor. Nerve replaced mass. For the Germans, this was more than frustrating. It was humiliating. Tigers and Panthers had been designed to dominate through direct confrontation. Crews were trained to expect duels, to believe in the superiority of their machines. Now they were forced to fight enemies who refused those duels. Reports described American destroyers using movement as defense. Captured officers called them ghosts, machines that struck and disappeared before the battlefield even began to make sense. The aura of invincibility around German armor cracked. The impact was not only tactical but psychological. Crews who once advanced with confidence now hesitated. Every ridge, every tree line, every ruined village became a potential ambush. Even when Hellcats were not present, the fear of them slowed columns, forced caution, drained initiative. In war, hesitation kills momentum. The Hellcat made hesitation constant. For American crews, the sense of fragility became part of their identity. They nicknamed their machines, painted names on turrets, and treated them with both affection and suspicion. They cursed the open turret in rain and snow, yet praised the visibility it gave in combat. They feared German shells, yet trusted their own speed. One veteran put it simply, "If you moved fast enough, you lived. If you stopped, you died." Production gave their gamble weight. 2,500 Hellcats rolled off assembly lines in less than 2 years. Each was a fraction of the cost of a Panther or Tiger. Each could be repaired quickly, replaced easily, maintained in the field. Where Germany built masterpieces in small numbers, America built efficiency in mass. When a Hellcat was lost, another waited. When a Panther was destroyed, it might take months before a replacement reached the front. Quantity turned fragility into strength. The Hellcat's record proved it. In Italy, it shredded convoys on mountain roads. In France, it broke counterattacks in fog. In the Ardennes, it delayed spearheads long enough for defenses to harden. Official reports credit Hellcat units with hundreds of destroyed German vehicles. More importantly, they disrupted timetables, slowed advances, and created fear disproportionate to their numbers. The victories were not just in wrecks, but in hours stolen from the enemy. Even German veterans admitted it. A Panther commander captured in 1945 said, "We had armor, we had guns, but they had time, and time was stronger." Another prisoner confessed, "They never gave us the duel. They hunted us like wolves." Those words, bitter as they were, captured the essence of the Hellcat's success. For the United States, the Hellcat was vindication. The tank destroyer doctrine had been controversial, criticized for creating fragile machines instead of more Shermans. Yet, on the battlefields of Europe, it worked. The Hellcat filled its role perfectly, fast, lethal, and coordinated. It did not replace tanks. It complemented them, covering flanks, breaking counterattacks, and haunting German armor with a weapon it could not counter. The lesson endured. War was not simply about thicker armor or bigger guns. It was about tempo, coordination, and the courage to exploit speed. The Hellcat taught its crews that survival lay in movement, not in standing ground. It taught commanders that doctrine could be as decisive as design, and it taught enemies that even the strongest machines could be undone by those who refused to play their game. In the post-war years, officers reflected on its paradox. The most fragile tank destroyer had often been the most effective, not because it was stronger, but because it changed the rules. It showed that in modern war, victory belonged to those who dictated time. Veterans never forgot. Decades later, they still spoke of the thrill of racing at full speed, of flanking shots that turned giants into burning wrecks, of the silence after ambushes where they knew they had survived by seconds. German survivors remembered something else, the helplessness of facing hunters who moved faster than fear. The M18 Hellcat was more than a machine. It was a statement. It proved that America could win not by imitating German armor, but by embracing its own strengths. Speed, mass production, coordination. It was the embodiment of a doctrine that valued time over thickness, initiative over duels, and survival through movement. And in that, it became a symbol of the American way of war.